I wrote a rhyme about DACs. Some got DAC fever. They want to turn you into a believer. Them dynamics and numbers, THDs and clocks, these peeps think the measuring game will never stop. A new DAC every month, better than the one last time. It's somehow more sublime, and you better agree, cause otherwise you'll get stomped out like organized crime. ESS and AKM battling like two lions in a den, acting like anything they release should make us feel born again. Have you got DAC fever? Are you a believer? Yo, topping yo SMSL, a DAC every month is quite an achievement, but you're making us lurch into bereavement. My DAC I got 6 months ago now causes disagreement? All those reviewers keep saying, now the dynamics is hot, the newest DAC is built like a dreadnought, that I need to delve into their honeypot, turn into an argonaut sailing the high seas of audiophile plots. But I get distraught, cause this turned into a game of the have and the have-nots, where common sense and reality aren't even afterthoughts. They screaming that the newest DAC is musical, as if the last one wasn't acoustical. I hear them say chocolate, full-bodied, throaty, dynamic, and rich, as if the last DAC they reviewed now has some kind of glitch. Yo, these guys should be streaming on Twitch. They play these DAC games like they're bewitched. Why is every DAC they get for free now the best one ever? They ain't being clever. We can see what's pulling that lever. They barf specs we already knew. They ain't telling us any new brew. Yo, it's not a big breakthrough. The difference they clap are like a cruise ship next to a canoe. Hey, it's not some voodoo. Why these reviewers so happy? Like they just fought off the Zulu. Truth is they're playing a broke-ass kazoo. They ain't got no special audiophile kung fu. They're sitting around fingers in the air going pew pew, pretending they're running a mob crew. They say no to an A-B test. They'd rather use words like some alchemist. They think they're blessed. Nah, their just thought process is compressed. Homie, this ain't drama. You ignoring the real trauma. You smoking too much marijuana. Don't tell me I should be like some Brahma. I spent my time, my dime, picking through the audiophile grime. I do this as a pastime. Who the hell are you to tell me I should be like the others and pantomime? This is the mountain I'll climb, with or without your help in the meantime. Do you repeat the hype, horse at your windpipe, telling others they're unripe for not hearing the atomic musical phenotypes, taking swipes, proposing and endorsing like somehow you got some special blood type? Nah. You see, I got my service stripes. I know these DAC homies are just prototypes. Alright, now that I've got that out of the way, let's discuss one of the newest DACs on the market. Shenzhen Audio sent me the new SMSL SU-9n for review. Shenzhen Audio has all sorts of stuff, from the typical to the atypical. If you're looking for exotic gear along with the mundane, check out Shenzhen Audio's website. The SU-9 is $400. What can this product do that others can't? You might wonder, didn't SMSL recently release the SU-9? Yes they did. And now, they've got an SU-9n. Both DACs have the same DAC chipset. Both support Bluetooth with the same codecs. Both support all high-resolution formats, including 32-bit PCM and DSD512. However, there are a few differences. The most significant is that the 9n does not support MQA. Besides that, the 9n has lower THD measurement by 0.00002%. And the 9n has an 8-core XMOS processor instead of the SU-9's 16-core processor. Not like that's really going to make a difference. The SU-9 and the 9n have the same look, shape, and size. They have the same inputs and outputs. The 9n is sturdy. It's got a full metal case that sits compactly on your desk. The screen is bright and easy to read. Some people mentioned that the original SU-9n had issues with its rubber feet. The feet on the 9n are spaced in a triangle. Frankly, if you push on either side of the SU-9n, it will tilt. SMSL included spare rubber feet if you want to add more. I'm not sure why this product is shipped with the triangular feet position. It's not particularly sturdy in this configuration. Fundamentally, the SU-9 and the 9n are identical in all but 4 ways. The XMOS processor and the difference in THD are completely irrelevant. The price gap is about $60, and of course, the 9n does not have MQA. I guess that's what MQA costs. $60. Overall, the 9n's features are fairly typical of a lot of DACs in the market. The lack of MQA might be, for some, a welcome excision of a tumor, and to others it might be a deal breaker. It just depends on whether you're on the MQA bandwagon. And let's be honest, Tidal is the principal distributor of MQA content, so this probably affects Tidal users more than others. As for build, the 9N is sturdy. It's not all that different from the older SU-8. We've come to expect good build from SMSL and topping, and that seems to hold true here. Unfortunately, the silly placement of the rubber feet is a questionable decision that you just have to rectify once you get the device. Before we get into the performance, let's talk briefly about the output voltage of the SU-9n. SMSL's marketing says that the DAC can achieve more than 4.8 volts, presumably through the XLR connection in pre-mode. If you have a fixed output mode through the balance connection, then you're limited to just over 4 volts. I don't have the ability to measure independently. However, ASR has. They found 4.1 volts. It was not clear whether ASR used the pre or fixed output for their measurements. Assuming ASR used the fixed output, then their measurements fall in line with SMSL's claims about the fixed output voltage. If, on the other hand, the ASR measurement was made with pre-out, then there is an obvious discrepancy. SMSL and Topping have a long history of playing with their measurement numbers. I'm hopeful that ASR measured with fixed output, which would confirm at least that much. You'll have to ask ASR why they didn't measure the pre-out voltage. When it comes to DACs and amps, I like to get right into the meat and potatoes. I have used and tested so many DACs and amps that I'm skeptical of the hype surrounding them. I conduct true A/B tests. I have rigorous testing processes that I've come to trust and rely upon. My hypothesis at the beginning of each test is that I will hear some difference. Why? Because I'm happy to give the benefit of the doubt. And frankly, it doesn't hurt to hope that a product will sound different from others in my collection. However, during the testing, I am hypercritical of what I hear. I want to figure out if the products I'm testing and comparing demonstrate material, audible differences. If there are major differences, then I state them. If there are minor differences, I tell you about them. And if there are no differences, I definitely highlight that. Keep in mind that I pay for a good 95% of the gear I have. On those occasions when companies send me stuff to review, I tell you. If I wanted to get your financial support, I tell you over and over again that a product is the most amazing or sounds so much better or more dynamic or more betterer than any other. But go through my over 500 videos and try to find when I make such claims. In short, I don't make those types of claims or statements. The reason for that is simple. True A/B tests. To test the SU-9n, I set up the following parameters. First, I tested the DAC by itself. I plugged it into my Windows 10 laptop. I connected to the 9N using the Gustard H16 and the RNHP. Both of these amps are neutral. I relied primarily on the H16 for all the tests here, but did regularly check my findings with the RNHP. In the first test, I had the amps connected to the 9N through both RCA and XLR. I switched back and forth on the amps, between balanced and single-ended connections to determine if I could hear a difference. In the second test, I compared the 9N to the SU-8, the Songcause LAQXD1, and the hifi Zen DAC. I connected 2 DACs at a time to my laptop. I used Voice Meter Banana to send signal to both DACs at once. I used the RCA out of each DAC, ran that through a passive RCA switch, and then up to the amps. This way, I could quickly flip back and forth between the 9N and its competitor. No need to stop the music or reconnect cables or any of that other tomfoolery. These comparisons help me figure out what the overall sound of the 9N is. Since I have already and repeatedly reviewed the competitors, let's dispense with their sounds. The SU-8 and Songcause are neutral. There's no difference in sound or presentation between them. The Zen DAC has a warmer sound signature with a noticeable emphasis in bass. In the third test, I went through the 9N's PCM filters. The idea was to listen for any audible differences among them. For all these tests, I wanted to use headphones that are analytical and revealing. After all, proponents of DACs keep claiming that all DACs have different sound signatures or that the best measuring DAC has the cleanest sound. So why not use the most revealing headphones we can? To that end, I use the Austrian Audio Hi-X55 and the Focal Clear. The X55 is not wired for balanced connection, but the Clear is. I tested these DACs while listening to my test playlist on Amazon Music HD. I made sure to use maximum output on each DAC. Volume matching was not an issue. With all of this preamble out of the way, let's get to the test results. The first test was about whether there is any audible difference between the SU-9n's balanced and single-ended connections. Remember, I connected directly to the H16 and the RNHP. I first plugged my X55 into the quarter range on the H16. The H16 allows me to switch between RCA and XLR output. I switched back and forth repeatedly to determine if there was any audible change. I repeated this test with the clear, but connected to the clear on the 4.4mm balanced output. There was no audible difference whatsoever between XLR and single-ended output on the 9N. I repeated this test with the RNHP and got the same result. This should not be a surprise. Balanced connection is intended for mitigating noise in the signal. Modern DACs and amps have THD and SNR that is so far below the human auditory level that it's not remotely relevant. You don't hear better sound just because a DAC happens to be 0.0005% better at THD or SNR in the measurements. Any claims that XLR or balanced output has a different or better sound are bogus. The only benefit balanced offers is higher power output, sometimes. And sometimes your headphones or IEM's drivers perform differently depending on how much power they receive. But you can get the same type of result using single-ended connection and do not need to resort to balanced topography. Let's move on to the second test. This is where we compare the SU-9n to the SU-8, the song cause, and the Zen DAC. There was no difference whatsoever between the SU-8 and the SU-9n. Flipping back and forth on the passive switch box, listening to one song after another, alternating between the X55 and the clear, resulted in exactly the same conclusion over and over and over again. The SU-9n has no audible sonic difference when compared to the SU-8. There's no alteration in clarity, detail, presentation, or sound signature. I next compared the 9n to the song cause. I used the same parameters as before, switching back and forth repeatedly, testing song after song. There was no audible difference whatsoever between these DACs. To make things a bit more interesting, I had a friend switch the RCA cables and connections and hide them from me. I did not know which connection was to which DAC. I repeated the test in this half-blind test. The result was exactly the same as before, no difference. Finally, I compared the 9n to the Zen DAC. There was an obvious alteration here. The Zen DAC clearly has more bass emphasis than the 9n, and when I activated the bass boost function on the Zen DAC, that difference became even more obvious. The emphasis on the Zen DAC is somewhere in the mid-bass region. This results from what I can tell slightly less clarity in the bass region in the Zen DAC compared to the 9n. There was also some deviation in treble presentation. The Zen DAC has a bit more emphasis than the 9n. This was not a night and day difference, but upon close A/B testing, it seemed clear enough. Someone asked me to specify in this review the sound signature of this DAC. Well, here's the thing. It's neutral, it's flat. Unless there's an obvious deviation from flat, transparent, neutral presentation, there's nothing really more to say. Many years ago, when I happened to use ESS DACs, I was convinced they had a harsh sound with a grainy or accentuated treble. Back then, I preferred what I heard from the Burr Brown or AKM offerings, comparatively speaking. But for the last 3 years at least, ESS chipsets have been as transparent or neutral as AKM. I don't hear the sharpness and graininess that I used to. If you want to say that my hearing has changed, yeah, that's probably true. Everyone's hearing, eyesight, and other senses change over time. That's nothing unique. I listened to the SU-9n plugged into the RNHP and the H16. I used not just the X55 and Focal Clear, but also my Aventone Planar, Allo Audio S4X, and the HD6XX. These I consider to be neutral headphones. I never heard a harsh accentuation, a treble spike, grainy vocals, or emphasized bass from the SU-9n stack when using those neutral headphones. Were I to go in-depth like I do with my headphone and IEM reviews, then I'd merely be telling you the sound signature of the headphones, not the DAC. Don't take this to mean that no DAC has a particular signature. I don't think that's true. I know the ASR crowd gets hostile about this issue, and some abusively berate anyone who says DACs have sound signatures. But modern DACs, especially those from SMSL and topping, are not offering people anything different. They're flat, transparent conversion of the digital signal to the analog section. So, for all those subjectivists who keep waxing poetic, I think you might be better off if you did actual A-B comparisons. The third and final test was to determine if there are any audible differences among the PCM filters. The 9N lets you select among several DAC filters. You can read about them in the manual. The 9N does not have a seamless transition from filter to filter. So, when you select a given filter, the music cuts out, resulting in dead silence, then a moment later, the music will cut in again. This is no way to conduct an A-B test. At times I thought that perhaps there was some minor difference between switching from one filter to the next, but it was impossible to know. I went through all the genres on my test playlist and couldn't find a single track that obviously stood out differently as I selected through the PCM filters. The 9N also has sound color options. These are similar to what's included in the original SU-9 and the SU-8. These color options have generic names that don't give you any real idea of what they're supposed to do. The manual claims that the sound colors use the DAC's DSP to make some different sound color. Very helpful. Thank you, SMSL. SMSL says that the sound colors will not change the frequency response curve. It would have been nice for SMSL to give us some hint what these sound colors are supposed to do. We can speculate based upon their generic titles, but that's far too much left to the imagination. Switching among sound colors has the same pausing and cutting out issue as with the PCM filters. So it's not really possible to do a true A-B test when the music cuts in and out every time you switch a setting. I thought I might have heard some differences among the various sound colors. For example, the tube setting appears to have some additional reverberation, minor though it might have been. The crystal setting appears to accentuate treble ever so slightly. So maybe there's an audible difference among those settings? You'd need 2 SU-9Ns to conduct a proper test. Let's summarize. Based upon my several months-long testing of the SU-9 and repeated comparisons, it seems to me that this product has a neutral or transparent sound. It is indistinguishable from the SU-8 and the Songcause LAQ-XD1. There's a fairly obvious difference between the 9N and the Zen DAC, as I discussed previously. The PCM filters make inaudible alterations. The sound color settings might theoretically make some minor difference, but I really can't be sure. What about dynamics? If you've seen any other reviews for this product, you have no doubt been told that the SU-9N has amazing dynamic range. They regurgitate the specifications and tell us that this means that the DAC is the best sounding, or the most high-tech, or the best all around. Some people use the phrase dynamic range interchangeably with the word dynamics. Dynamics or dynamic range is the differences you can hear between the softest and the loudest parts in your song. As far as audio is concerned, dynamic range is the differences you can hear in the loudness of your music. Some moments in a track might be rather quiet, other moments might be very loud. Take my test song Mountains as an example. There, the sub-bass is quiet at the beginning until it builds into a crescendo. This alteration, should be fairly obvious. You can visualize these loudness differences. If you have foobar, you can download a plugin that shows you the dynamic range of your particular track. You can also use the MAT Dynamic Range Meter. I'm sure there are other utilities you can download. There are, I think, 2 glaring issues that seldom get addressed when people wax poetic about a DAC's dynamic range. First, the dynamic range of your music. And second, the dynamic range your ears are capable of hearing. Your music might not have the dynamic range you think it does. Generally speaking, CD-quality PCM recordings have a maximum dynamic range of around 96 decibels, and evidently, DSD can achieve a dynamic range of up to 120 decibels. You might also want to stroll over to the loudnesswar.info website. That's a database of measured dynamic range of a given album. It doesn't have every conceivable album in its library, but you can search for your own. Search results will display the artist, album, year of the release, dynamic range measurement, whether it was downloaded or from a CD or from vinyl, and whether the album was lossy or lossless. It's a great place to get information about the music you might be listening to. The next issue is what you and I are physiologically able to hear. What your ears are capable of perceiving is going to be different from what the equipment is capable of producing. So while your equipment might measure certain technicalities, that does not mean you will actually be able to hear it. SNR and THD measurements are a perfect example of this. The human auditory system is unable to perceive differences in THD below 1%. So all the hype behind lower and lower and lower THD measurements have no realistic impact in practice. The SU-9n's purported dynamic range is 130 decibels and 120 decibels for XLR and RCA respectively. Unfortunately for us mere mortals, the maximum theoretical dynamic range for the human ear operating at its optimum is about 120 decibels. Beyond 120 decibels can be awfully painful, and when pain is involved, it's hard to concentrate on the music. Let's combine both factors. First, that the dynamic range of your music may be far below what the equipment is capable of producing, and second, that our ears have a maximum threshold. If you listen to streaming services, then you might not be aware of the dynamic range they produce. You might be able to figure that out depending on the particular service you're using. If you use CDs, you can measure the dynamic range using a utility. If you downloaded your music, you can use FooBar or some other utility to get a measurement. I recognize that many reviewers who talk about DACs cannot help but mention the dynamics or dynamic range. But these DACs are not upscaling dynamic range. It is what it is for your music. I find it highly unconvincing that somehow the newest DAC someone is reviewing makes the same music more dynamic. It's just not rational or realistic. As with anything else, using such concepts in a vacuum is not beneficial. When you take a few minutes to think about all of this stuff, you're left with no clear answers. But the extremists are undaunted and continue to regurgitate their beliefs. In my view, there is only one way for you and I, those of us in the middle, to figure out what's material, what's beneficial, what's real. We have to conduct actual tests and comparisons, true ABX setups. And, just as importantly, compare specifications of competitors to see how different the components or measurements really are. Take dynamic range as an example. The SU-9n has between 120 and 130 decibels of dynamic range, as we talked about. But the EX5 has 125 decibels of dynamic range. The Songcause LAQ-XD1 has 121. The SU-8 version 2 has 120. The Sabage D5 has between 124 and 127 decibels dynamic range. The Topping E50 has 124 decibels. For the time being, maybe the SU-9 has the highest dynamic range of a comparative group, but it's not like the differences are light years apart. As far as the SU-9n goes, there is no audible difference in dynamics or dynamic range between it and the other neutral DACs I tested. Sorry to break it to you. It would be great if people who promote DAC dynamics would tell us exactly what music they listened to, what the dynamic range of that music was, and if they did comparisons with another DAC that has slightly lower measured dynamic range. Sadly, I have yet to see or hear any reviewer, big or small, talk about this when they're telling us that the dynamics are amazing. What will make a bigger difference is how loudly you listen to your gear. If your headphones are underpowered, try an amplifier that will properly drive them. You might hear a difference. In other words, if you've been using a dongle DAC to connect to your large format planar magnetic headphone, test with an amp that has a minimum of 250 milliwatts and give it a try. You might hear an alteration. Ultimately, I don't give much credit to those who claim one product is less dynamic or more dynamic than another. Without proper true A/B tests, that kind of conclusion is baseless and relies on incomplete methodology. I might as well discuss Bluetooth on the SU-9n. It's got it, just like the SU-9. You can send Bluetooth signal from your mobile device to the SU-9n. I suppose if you've got the 9n connected to speakers, this might be beneficial. We still don't get Bluetooth transmission, which is unfortunate. There are times when you might want to connect your Bluetooth headphones to the music stored on your computer. Windows limits Bluetooth to SBC and Mac to AAC. It would be really nice if DACs could be used to transmit the whole spectrum of Bluetooth audio. Of course, Bluetooth is a convenience, and I'm glad it is included. You'll get LDAC, aptX, and AAC support for reception only. This is the part of the review most people skip to, and this is where some people who have preconditioned beliefs about DACs get super upset. Most people just want the best audio experience they can afford. When they look for DACs, they're just trying to find something that will last for years. But when we check DAC options online, we get two divergent opinions. Either we get subjective commentary or objective hardlines. On the one hand, you might hear from some subjectivists that all DACs sound different. On the other hand, you might be told from objectivists that DACs don't have a sound signature and that all that matters are the measurements. What both sides refuse to do is actual true A/B tests. This is precisely the reason why you should be skeptical of hype no matter where it comes from. The SU-9n has received its share of hyperbole. Subjectivists and objectivists laud this product for their own reasons. Either this DAC is amazing because it's got the best dynamics and sound ever, or it's amazing because it's got the best measurements ever. But if both sides agree this product is amazing, why not just buy it? Because these camps will rinse and repeat their hype for the next product that comes out. It's never ending. My position is that you should consider products in context, in comparative analysis. Ignore the flowery, poetic language that makes little to no sense. Ignore the measurements that have no tangible effect on your auditory abilities. And look for opinions where people did try to conduct some form of constructive comparisons. The bottom line is that the SMSL SU-9 is a good DAC. It has a neutral or transparent sound. It's easy to use. You get the typical DAC features, the full range of PCM and DSD support, Bluetooth, and balanced and single-ended connections. You get the difficult-to-justify PCM filters and the questionable sound color settings. But this thing is $400. Why are people spending this much money on a product that sounds like alternatives half its price? I figure that some people just want the newest stuff. Others want the best measuring stuff. You also can't discount those who think that buying a more expensive DAC than the one they currently have will result in huge differences in sound signature or performance. Frankly, I think people spend far too much time, money, and effort on DACs and amps. DACs that cost several thousands of dollars are not 100 times better than the cheaper options. And after repeated A/B tests using sensitive headphones and a consistent testing methodology, I found that the $200 song cost does not have half the sound performance of the SU-9n. When I reviewed the original SU-9, I said it was a good product, but its price was not justified at nearly $500. It's nice that SMSL lowered the price and took out MQA and now gives us a $400 alternative. But is it really that much better an option than the multitude of competitors in the market, especially from SMSL and Topping themselves? This brings us to value. I am not convinced that $400 is a reasonable price for this product. What exactly does it do differently from alternatives that cost less? I mean, if you look at the Topping EX5, you get a lot more return on investment. The EX5 gives you neutral or transparent sound, a built-in powerful amplifier, Bluetooth, and MQA for about $350. What does the EX5 not have that the SU-9 does? Okay, the 9n has sound colors. Big deal. You're better off using Equalizer APO or some equivalent software. The 9n clearly is not for everyone. And those of us who are critical of expensive and hyped products, the SU-9n seems like another copy and paste product out of SMSL's laboratory. Yes, it might excel in technical measurements, but in real-world use, you cannot hear those measured improvements. For those who have been using an audio interface or a sound card in their PC, you people might want to buy yourselves a system that you'll keep for years to come. If that's the situation, then the SU-9 is as good an option as many others. If you can find legitimate reasons to buy this product, then rest assured you'll get sturdy construction, easy operation, and a neutral, clean sound, just like other options in the market. But that's the point I'm trying to make. You won't get magical sound from the SU-9n. Its technical capabilities have no tangible effect. If you choose to buy this DAC, then you can find other reasons. And there's no shame in saying that you just want something nice even though it's expensive. And if that's you, it's fine. Buy the SU-9n. It's a good product.